Let's do it. Hello, everyone. And if you're from Russia, then приветики, мои креветки, and welcome to Understandable English. Today, I'm continuing my travel series about different trips that I've taken around the world so that you can learn English and learn about the world at the same time. I have already done some other episodes about places in Russia as well as Armenia, so you can check those out on my profile as well. This is part 1 of 3 because it was such a long trip. Now, I know what most of you are probably thinking. If you read the title, you're probably thinking, wow, this is the most stereotypical trip anyone who goes to Russia could possibly do, other than maybe just to see the capitals, St. Petersburg and Moscow, that is the northern or cultural capital, and then the administrative capital in Moscow. But I just want to argue and say that mine was a little bit different, because I didn't just take trains, but I also hitchhiked in order to get a better sense of the people and to visit places that I probably wouldn't have seen if I took just the train. Now, this trip happened a few years ago, back in 2021, and it was a massive trip. It was planned to take about 3 months, but in the end, I ended up having to speed up a little bit, and it was only about 2.5 months. I will put a map on the screen here now so that you can see my path and see the different cities and places I went to. Maybe you can see if I visited your neck of the woods or your area where you live. Now, I started this trip in the Caucasus, in Dagestan. And the Caucasus is a bit of a famous region in Russia, both in and outside of Russia, because it is very different than the rest of the country. First of all, it has famous hospitality, that is, the way that people treat guests. I think that, in my experiences, these people are so very kind. They will literally give you their shoes if they think that you don't have your own shoes. The food is also a bit different, and I would say that it's also quite magical food, very delicious. In this region, there are also a lot of beautiful mountains and sceneries to see in nature, and so it's also quite a popular tourist destination. Also, I think it's good to mention, especially when traveling anywhere in Russia, that there's a big difference between ethnic Russians and Russian citizens, because in some regions, like Dagestan or Chechnya, the amount of ethnic Russians is much lower. From abroad, we still call these people Russians because they are Russian citizens, but ethnically, they are not. They are something different. So I started my trip in Makhachkala, and from there I went to explore the mountains and some of the smaller villages that are in the surrounding areas. Now, I think I'm going to have to kind of speed run this trip because it was so long and I don't want to have to make 20 videos just for one trip. So I'm going to try to speed run some of these things and talk about what I saw. So in Dagestan, I will start by talking about the desert. There is this area that suddenly it just turns into a massive hilly, duny desert. It looks almost like Morocco. It was very strange to see, but very beautiful also. It was kind of funny because I had just bought a new hat for this trip and I was excited to have it. And on the first day of my trip in this desert, the wind blew it off and it flew away and I never saw it again. In Dagestan, there are canyons and the water in these canyons are so blue, like a juice, or in the United States, I would say it looks like Gatorade, which is a sports drink. There are these ancient villages that you can walk through and the Troll's Tongue, which is another famous place. There are also some modern day villages where people live very independently from the rest of the world. They don't really need a lot, and so they don't often use money for things other than buying some sugar or some salt or things that they can't actually get from their own village and their own farms and their own animals. When I came out of the mountains to visit the city of Derbent, it was kind of a strange feeling because the Caucasus are known for being quite a conservative region, and especially so in the mountains. And as we came out of the mountains into the city, there was this loud music and dancing, and it was a much more relaxed version of the people and the culture that I had seen just recently in the mountains. Derbent was a beautiful old city with these winding roads. I think it's something like 5,000 years old, so it's a famous and old ancient city. After my time in Dagestan, I went to Chechnya, which I made a whole other video about, so you can check that out here. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video, simply to save some time, but I can tell you that I ended up being on Chechen TV. After Chechnya, I went to Ingushetia, And a lot of the most interesting things for tourists are in the south part of this region, but I tried to do the paperwork to get there. It's a border zone, so you need specific documents to go there. And I tried, but by the time I got there, it wasn't enough time, and so I was unable to visit these regions. But I was still in the capital city of, I think it's called Magas. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And this was an interesting city because it is very new. It almost looks like someone just copied and pasted some sort of building and some sort of street into a field. And so it was very interesting to go because you would walk and there's not a lot of people, almost like some of the houses are empty. And sometimes you just walk and the end of the road, it's just a field and that's all. There was this big tower that you could climb up and look and see, and it was quite an interesting city for the day that I was there. Next on the list was Northern Ossetia, and I can say that I had the Ossetian pies. They were very delicious, but the weather was terrible. It was raining all the time, so I ended up skipping a lot of the nature and the mountains that I wanted to see there. From there, I went to Mount Elbrus, which a lot of people argue about, but they say that it's the tallest mountain in Europe. I think people may also argue that Mount Blanc is the tallest, but in general, a lot of people will consider Mount Elbrus to be the tallest in Europe. I had been there already in the winter to go skiing, and this was my first time in the summer. But it was beautiful. It was the end of the flower season, the end of spring, and so I still had a few of them, but a lot of them had already disappeared. I went along a beautiful mountain road to something called Gilusi, and then onwards up towards the base camp for people who are going to climb Elbrus. I also visited the resort towns of Kislovodsk and Pitigorsk, and I can say that I really liked Pitigorsk. There was the mountain, I think Bishtau, that you could climb, and I really liked the feeling of Pitigorsk. It was small and easy enough to walk around. It was calm and quiet, very green. And so I think that would be quite an interesting city to not only visit, but also to live in. Now, after some time had passed, I was going to try to go back to Northern Ossetia to see the mountains. And this is kind of a funny story because the day before I had eaten some strange food and my stomach was hurting. And I had food poisoning, which means you eat something that's not good for you. And I still felt okay, so I decided to still go even though my stomach was hurting. And as I was standing on the side of the road, I was hitchhiking, waiting for a car. The car that decided to stop for me was an ambulance, which was kind of funny. And I thought, I'll take a ride with the ambulance. Why not? It's a funny story. And as I was sitting there, they put me into the back, normally where the patient would sit. And because there were no windows, I was starting to feel car sick because I couldn't see and I was moving strangely. And this made me want to go outside and fix my stomach, if you know what I mean. And after doing this, the doctor that was in the ambulance decided that I was very, 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 very sick and that it was an emergency to go to the hospital. And of course, I did not want to go to the hospital, but she insisted and wouldn't let me leave. So she drove me to the hospital, made me do all kinds of analysis and do all kinds of tests. And finally she told me that I was not going to die and I was okay. But I had wasted my whole day in this adventure at the hospital, and so I didn't get to go to the mountains in Ossetia as I wanted, and I needed to continue moving east so that I would stay on schedule. From there, I decided to try to save some time and take a train in the typical Trans-Siberian way that a lot of people travel. And so I hopped on and I went towards the city Rostov-na-Donu, or I guess Rostov-on-the-Don, as we might say in English. And from there, continued on to Volgograd, which some people might know historically as Stalingrad. But the thing I like about trains, especially in this area, is that depending on where you are, you can get all kinds of interesting, delicious foods on the platform at various stops. And there was a city, I think it was called Volgodonsk, maybe, and on the platform they were selling massive fish that were smoked. And so everyone, as we got to this stop on the train, decided to go outside and buy huge fish and bring it back into the train. So after this, the entire train starts to smell like smoked fish, and it was wonderful. But I guess if you don't like fish, it might have been torture. I spent some time in Volgograd, which is probably most famous for its massive statue, which is called the Motherland Calls. It's absolutely huge on top of a hill and near a big memorial for the people who fought in the Second World War. This thing was stunning. I had seen other similar Soviet-style statues in other places around the world, but this one was absolutely massive, and I probably spent 2 hours just staring at this thing as the sun began to set because I was just in awe. The other big thing that happens in Volgograd is the Battle of Stalingrad Museum, which I expected to be a bit of a stale or not so interesting history museum, but I was very surprised. There, of course, were some old things that were from that time, but also very many of these animated light shows with projectors and showed how things changed and how things happened. And there were different stories and anecdotes about people who were living in the city as well as people who fought in these battles and so on. If you were in Volgograd, it's definitely worth the visit to this museum. After this, I continued on my way east back into the more typical Trans-Siberian path. So that's the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. If you learned something new, feel free to press like, subscribe, and as always, have a wonderful day. Toodles.